Welcome back, AP. All right, so let's go ahead and put all this art stuff to bed. Well, we left off here in class talking about Michelangelo and how he was kind of like a very good example of the high Renaissance man, right? Sculptor, frescoist, painter, writer, architect, right? We left off here before my computer kind of broke down a little bit. I just wanted to kind of brush over these artworks again, but this is the Pieta, right? Very famous piece. It's currently housed in the Vatican. It's been attacked by a guy with a hammer, right? Very cool representation, though, of Michelangelo's personal styles, due to some little, like, kind of improportional things and focuses on different characters. The thing is, it was actually meant to be a tombstone for a cardinal. And the crazy parts about it is, like, a couple things. Number one, Mary's huge, all right? Like, if she were to stand next to this Christ, Mary would actually be much taller than Christ is. However, he used the draping and the robes to actually mask that effect, right? And look at, like, the detail, the absolute detail. And this is stone, right? Like, it's marble, and it looks like layered cloth, right? He also de-emphasized the wounds of the stigmata, right? They're actually very, very small. And you can also see the very, very small cut right there where the spear apparently went in that killed, or didn't kill Christ, but he was already dead, but the spear that went in. And also the fact that Mary looks ridiculously young. She actually looks about the age that she would have been when she gave birth to Christ in this sculpture, not necessarily the other way around. Well, we've talked about the Pieta when you were a freshman. That right there is the dome that I was talking about. Michelangelo is also responsible for erecting this dome on top of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. So he's also a very accomplished architect. And then, of course, this is his most famous piece, right? White Carrara marble, the David, right? The David was originally meant to actually go on to the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, where Brunelleschi's dome is housed. He's supposed to be looking left towards Rome, right, back to the Vatican. And he also was a very big standout of high Renaissance sculpting as well, kind of following on the heels of Donatello, showing a nude figure, showing the proportions of the human body, the beauty that the human body actually portrayed at the time. Also, the anatomical attributes are very, very solid. There are a couple of things that were unproportional about this statue on purpose, all right? For example, right here, his hands are actually very, very large, larger than they should be. And actually inside that hand is supposed to be the rock that slayed Goliath, because the sling actually goes down around his back. And he's supposed to be looking off towards Rome, and possibly this is when he just saw Goliath come around a hill. And it's he's meant to be the reason why his hands are also so large is he's supposed to be strong of hand, saying that he was a strong human. But then also, it's just a phenomenal work because everything is completely proportional. The figure is astonishing. If you ever get a chance to go and see it in Florence, it's absolutely amazing. Some of the things they're actually struggling with, of course, Michelangelo tried to prevent was some of its structural problems. I could talk all day about this one piece of art, but of course that's not the point in AP, right? So a couple of structural problems is that branch right there was actually added later on to try and prevent David's ankle from breaking. He's also, if you can tell, he's standing in contrapposto. Thank you, Tommy. I heard you over there, right? His hip angle and his shoulder angle are actually going to converge right there. And then also, he's gone through some structural problems because the number of people that come to see him every year, it's like a small magnitude earthquake is happening around the statue 24/7. So it's actually like getting some stress fractures and things like that. So the Uffizi Gallery in Florence is trying to figure out ways to actually preserve it, but they're struggling. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, it's also huge. It's like several meters tall. It's very, 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 very big. But it's phenomenal. If you ever get a chance, go see it. And of course, this is The School of Athens by Raphael Sanzio, right? We talked about him. We talked about his birthday and everything like that today. And so The School of Athens, of course, being a very, very famous piece. It's actually in the papal apartments in the Vatican. So this is actually one of the apartments where the Pope would actually be sleeping. It's actually inside of, or it's either there or it's in his library. I think it's his library, actually. It's supposed to be near the books on philosophy. Some of the really cool things about the School of Athens, though, it's a very good model of high Renaissance artwork because it represents Greek and Roman figures, right? And they're all Greek and Roman figures that supposedly were major influencers on the ideas of academia. This is supposed to be happening in Plato's Academy, right? Plato's Academy is supposed to be the humanist school during this time period. And this is Plato right here, and that's Aristotle right there, which actually, if you look closely at them, Plato resembles what we believe in some classical imagery as God would look, and then Aristotle actually looks more like Christ, right? Which actually is a good representation as well, because Plato is pointing up towards the sky, emphasizing the ideal versus the real universe, studying things that are rationalist, that are not tangible, whereas Aristotle right here is like actually putting his hand out like this, saying we need to study the physical world, empirical learning, right? Learning from our observations. Those two schools of thought, and the vanishing point in this piece is actually right there, right? So like possibly signifying the Holy Trinity as well. But we're not just we're not absolutely positive. We do believe, though, as art critics and art historians, that the clothing that Aristotle and Plato are wearing are actually meant to try and signify the ideal universe, because he's wearing elemental colors of fire and air, whereas water and earth are being worn by Aristotle, and everybody on this side, they're kind of empirical philosophers trying to show things that you can reach out, touch, and study, and everybody on this side are more loftier rationalist thinkers. Socrates is actually standing right here. That we believe that might be Alexander the Great. One of the coolest ones that's in there is actually two things. Number one, Raphael himself, he painted himself right there in the corner. Some art critics believe that he also painted himself right here in what he wishes he ideally looked like, right? And one of the other coolest things is they actually added this guy. I think it's Heraclitus is the philosopher's name. I'd have to double check. But we actually believe that this is his homage to his rival, Michelangelo, right? We believe that he actually painted Michelangelo as the forlorn, sad philosopher. I believe his name is Heraclitus. I got to look it up again, though, because he's actually sitting alone, and he's very, very like pouty looking and writing alone. He's one of the four, and this figure was actually added much later. It's actually a secco feature that he added after he saw the Sistine Chapel ceiling to try and give some props to his guy Michelangelo. This also right here, this is the Sistine Madonna. It's a very, very famously reproduced piece of art, right? Of course, these cherubs you've seen in your grandma's bathroom. The figures are set up in the set of a triangle to try and emphasize the Holy Trinity. Also, the other part is the creepy, scary cherub faces that are actually hidden in the back behind St. Peter. Very, very cool. But this actually is that's a oil-based paint. So that is actually not a fresco, I don't believe. I need to double check on that, though. Anyway. Then you've got this guy. This is Albrecht Durer, who is a great example of German Northern Renaissance art, and Northern High Renaissance art, right? Again, using, like we talked about with our other guys, Jan van Eyck and Roger van der Weyden, like limited lighting, right? Extreme detail, very glossy, high details. This is one of the coolest things I love about this. This is actually done in 1500. It's a self-portrait of himself, and he actually put his signature right there. And so his biggest contribution to art is not necessarily his painting. It's his engraving, right? So write engraving down. Basically what Albrecht Dürer does is he turns the printing press into a tool of art, right? So these woodcuts, as they're called, or engraved metal plates, are actually things that are much smaller, about the size of a book. This technology that he actually pushed forward is how illustrations were added to early printed books, right? So you would have like a piece of wood or a piece of metal and a metal stylus, and you would dip that in acid and then carve into the like piece of wood or piece of metal the exact negative of this image. So every time you see a black line, that's actually raised up. And every time you see white, it's actually pushed down, right? So, and then you would roll ink on it, load it into a printing press, and shaka, and actually make several of them. This is Durer's rhinoceros, right? You can see his engraving symbol right there, his signature right there as well. One of the coolest stories about this whole thing is he actually never saw the rhinoceros. The rhinoceros, actually, the engraving was being made for one of the popes at the time because he was supposed to be being given a gift from an Ottoman ruler of a rhinoceros to add to his like scenery and his like little menagerie. He was like collecting animals. The rhinoceros, when it was on the way to the Pope, it actually, like, the ship that was carrying it sunk, and the rhinoceros drowned. And so Albrecht Dürer was asked to create an engraving of it, and Albrecht Dürer was like, well, I've never seen a rhinoceros before. And a man described it to him, and he actually did this without ever seeing a rhino, ever. Which is a really, really cool story. And then this is one of his other ones. This is a very famous one. Jules Barry, I know you know this one. This is Night, Death, and the Devil. Trying to show the duality of good and evil, right? And showing, basically mocking the devil right here, which is really cool. Death, he actually looks much more gruesome, holding the hourglass, which is a constant symbol of time. And then, of course, our fabled Middle Ages hero right here, who actually uses a foxtail as an imagery of a good hunter. He is unfazed by both of these evils, and he keeps looking forward in his progression to heaven or the Holy Kingdom right there, right? One of the coolest things, too, is, of course, if you look at Death's horse, it looks very sick and very, gross. And then if you look down here, you can see skull imagery, the ideas of heroism through the dog. And then the other cool thing is you can actually see his signature, again, hidden right there. And again, it's an engraving, so everything's done in the negative. It's very, very cool. He actually does an entire series. He does one on the Four Horsemen, if you want to look it up. He does one, Melancholia 1 is another great version of it. But his engraving is his main style. This you just need to jot down real quick. You know who this guy is. William Shakespeare, of course, considered a Northern High Renaissance artist in the terms of writing and playwriting, even though he's coming out almost like when the Renaissance was ending, but he's like following the height of it, right? So I like to lump him in as a very, very esteemed writer, okay? Now we got to talk really quickly about our female artists, and then we'll kind of wrap this whole thing up, right? So first of all, we've got very famous female artists like Sofonisba Anguissola, right? Which is right here. Very, very cool thing. This was actually a piece of art that was being done for this guy right here, Charles V of Spain. It was supposed to be a portrait of him, but then she proposed, like, hey, how about we make you look smart? And how about I paint you painting me? And it's actually, this is her. So Sofonisba, all right, and actually painted herself in this picture to try and show the dominance and the intelligence of Charles V, ironically enough, than painting herself in more traditional garb and much more high, lit in the as the more the subject of the painting, ironically enough. It's a very, very cool done, very, very, very solidly done piece. And then this is Elisabetta Sirani. This is actually a very famous story from the Old Testament of Judith. I think it's Judith wounding herself, right? No. This is one of the Roman. I gotta look up the story on this, and I'll have to tell you again about it tomorrow because I do not want to mess it up, but it's a very cool story. So the biggest thing about female artists is several women actually became well known as painters during this time period. Typically, they were daughters of painters or minor nobles who had no sons, right? So the thing about it is, though, that unfortunately their careers were very short-lived. Produced far fewer paintings after marriage, or they stopped altogether, and they never quite got the fame that a lot of your other male artists are going to get because they weren't allowed to showcase their talents. And women also were not allowed to study the male nude, so they were never allowed to actually incorporate nude figures, so it was a very limiting factor, especially in the Italian Renaissance, which saw a giant resurgence of nude figures in art. Like, look at Botticelli, right? The Birth of Venus is a completely nude figure. Fun fact about the Birth of Venus also, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but there's a chance that Botticelli actually fell in love with the model that was the Birth of Venus, and there's an old myth that says that he's buried near her because he wanted to die with her, but she was married when he actually met her. Now, women also were not allowed, so essentially they were forced to do Old Testament work or old stories. Women also were not allowed to learn the fresco technique because it was considered a public form of art. They were also not allowed to join painters' workshops with men because it was seen as improper. So all of these women were actually much more self-taught, what you would consider to be self-taught artists than your male figures, actually. But yeah, so that's it. I just wanted to make sure you knew about these female artists to let you know that there actually was some female influence in art during the Renaissance. It's not just Isabella d'Este. It's not just Christine de Pizan, right? So starting tomorrow, we're going to talk about Renaissance culture, and we're going to talk about the Renaissance papacy as well, okay? So, and then we're going to be wrapping up, and then we're going to be getting ready for your first test. So I'll see you guys then. I hope you all have a good evening. I'll see you all tomorrow.